This is Dr. Eli Saetnan, Senior Academic Developer, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the University of Liverpool Academy's Developing Practice podcast. Today, myself, Alex Owen, Academic Developer, and Matt Davis, Organisational Developer, sat down with Dr. Eli Saetnan, a Senior Academic Developer. It was great to catch up with Eli and drill down into the topic of academic scholarship. We hope you enjoy our chat. Eli, it's really lovely to be speaking to you today. It's lovely to be speaking to a colleague and someone I actually sit next to in the office, usually when we're working on campus. But it's great for us to find some time online as well to catch up and to hear about some of your work. But before we get started, it would be lovely if you could tell us a little bit about your professional background and how you've arrived at your position today.
Right, so many moons ago, I did a PhD in ecology. I might even take a step further back. My undergraduate degree was a joint degree between archaeology and ecology. And then I carried on the ecology for a while, did a PhD in ecology. And then while I was writing up, I took a job briefly as a research assistant in animal science, which then led to me moving into what essentially was a lectureship, but on paper I was a sort of postdoc and teaching fellow in an animal science department. So I was teaching animal science for a number of years. And that was always short-term contracts kind of rolling along. And eventually the luck ran out with those short-term contracts. And so I changed career again. I came up to Liverpool and became an educational developer. So I've kind of made a transition from humanities and archaeology into science, biology, into more applied science, as in animal science, and then into education, and sort of come full circle in some ways.
And did all your higher education experience take place in the United Kingdom?
I've been all over the place. So I was in the States, I went back to Norway, back to the States, and then around the UK for the past a long time, 15 years.
And then you've ended up in Liverpool.
And then I've ended up in Liverpool, yeah.
Brilliant. And how long did you say you've been here?
So I've only been here about 3 years. I keep in my head thinking it's only been a year, and then somebody reminds me that no, it's been a bit longer. So I still feel very new to the job, but then I have colleagues like yourself who have been there less than me, which reminds me that actually I've been there quite a while now.
Brilliant. And tell us a little bit about your role now. So you work in the academy.
So I'm now a senior academic developer in the academy. Part of my role is I teach on the PG CAP, and the module that I'm in charge of on the PG CAP program is the scholarship module. And then alongside that, I've got various other projects. Kind of the big part of my remit is to support scholarship in various forms, which is kind of why I'm interested in this topic of actually what is scholarship and what is it I'm trying to do, which I guess is why we're having this conversation today.
It certainly is. Yeah, we are talking specifically about academic scholarship. So this will be a big learning curve for me because I know very little about this topic. So I'm keen to arrive at the same sort of understanding as maybe some of my other colleagues. But from speaking to different colleagues, I understand that it's a contested topic. So why is academic scholarship contested?
I think it's just a difficult word to pin down of what counts as scholarship. And it partly because disciplines have very different expectations of what counts as research, or what counts as evidence, or what counts as kind of scholarly activity. And when we, as a university or as a central unit, like the academy is, we try and come up with a definition that is acceptable to every department in the university. kind of people have a difficulty agreeing on what that means. So I think that's where it comes from. It's we have a sense of like, okay, scholarship is good and scholarship is kind of what university is all about. But when you then try and pin down, well, what does it look like? How do you do it? What counts as good scholarship or bad scholarship? Then those very different disciplinary perspectives kind of get in the way.
Right. So no wonder I'm so confused about it then. If everyone's got their own take on it.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between scholarship and research then? And if so, how is that different?
I think that's where, personally, I don't necessarily know that there is a clear difference. So the university tries to kind of pigeonhole people, so academic members of staff can get onto the teaching and research tenure track type posts,
Yeah.
or they go into the teaching and scholarship type posts, which suggests that scholarship is different from research. But then when you start to unpick, well, what does actually scholarship mean? What does it mean to do scholarship? To my mind, it kind of comes back to these people are doing research. They're just not doing the same kind of research as the people who are on a research track post are doing. But then we come back to those kind of disciplinary arguments about what is research and what is not research. I think to my mind, it comes down to scholarship is a form of research, but is a particular aspect of research, and it's very much from a practitioner practice side, the view of a person kind of looking at practice and how to develop that practice. Whereas research is kind of maybe more of the kind of blue skies questions and understanding the world around you in a different kind of way.
Okay.
So to help us get our head around that a little bit, have you got some examples? Because I hear what you're saying in terms of academic scholarship is potentially a form of research, of learning and teaching practice, but that will of course look very, very different for different disciplines. Have you got any examples from people that you've been chatting to about what their scholarship, academic scholarship looks like in terms of their specific learning and teaching practice?
Yeah, try and think of specific examples, but I guess that's kind of how the whole PG CAP is built up. So there's this idea of engaging with scholarship or contributing to scholarship, and those are maybe two different sides of the same coin. So if you think the way the PG CAP is built up, the first module is an introduction to learning and theory and to kind of reflecting on own practice and drawing on scholarship that others have produced. So you're looking at kind of evidence of what works in teaching that others have published. So that's kind of taking a scholarly approach to your practice to look for evidence of what works and applying that. And so you're kind of consuming scholarship. And then the second module of the PG CAP is where we kind of encourage people then to move into being producers of scholarship rather than just consumers of scholarship. And our participants do that in a whole range of different ways. So it's kind of doing a small investigation. It's a form of research, as in you're looking at your own practice and looking at, well, what can I do differently? And what's the evidence for whether it's working or not working? And so people then, for instance, might look at redeveloping a module and they go and talk to past students about their experience of being students on that module and what worked and what didn't for their learning. And then alongside looking at what other teachers do on similar modules and how they feel things might work, and looking at kind of literature and theory around how we understand learning to happen, and then pulling that together and drawing some conclusions about how you can then implement a change to your practice to make it better.
Brilliant. And there's also some discussion, isn't there, about the dissemination of academic scholarship. So often I think colleagues like to understand that idea of dissemination as far broader than just getting published in an academic journal. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think that's where some of the kind of debates or the conflict comes in, I guess, that people who very much are in the frame of kind of research scholarship or the traditional research focus will kind of assume, well, if it isn't published in a peer-reviewed journal, it isn't scholarship because it's not proper research, whatever that means. Whereas the field of learning and teaching scholarship is trying to push people to think a bit broader. So there's a nice definition of from Schulman, actually, from 2000, which talks about scholarship as it involves us making our work public. So it's about making our practice public, open to peer review, open to discussion, and with the kind of with the intention of that then helping us improve our work and to build better teachers in the future from that. So if you think, okay, well, how do I make my work public and open to peer review and peer discussion? Well, it could be in a peer-reviewed journal, but it could also be on a blog or in a conference presentation or in a seminar or a workshop that you run with colleagues, or any number of ways. So it's kind of then letting you think, well, it's about sharing your practice and discussing practice and reflecting on practice, but it doesn't have to be published in a 4-star ref appropriate journal necessarily.
I guess in some ways then that's quite daunting for people, because if they are sharing practice, they're basically putting themselves out there potentially for criticism, aren't they? Especially if it's in places like, I don't know, like speaking at conferences and so on and so forth. I guess you need a bit of a thick skin with that.
Yeah, I'd like to think that the field of learning and teaching, that we're all supportive and we're all, trying to encourage everyone to do better and to be the best we can be, and not necessarily to pick holes and kind of tear people down, but it does open you up, and the kind of questions that you get, even if they are not meant to be kind of horrible or questions to tear you down, they are questions that make you think about your own assumptions and values and motivations, which can be uncomfortable, I suppose, to really lay that bare and have to articulate those things.
Yeah, definitely. But that's obviously a great way to reflect, isn't it? When somebody asks you a question that you might have thought would be obvious, given on what you've just been saying, or somebody asks you a direct question about it, then obviously it isn't so obvious, which then helps you reflect on, am I putting this across in the right way? Is my practice as clear as it could be?
So Ellie, you've obviously been through a big disciplinary change from studying ecology to now being in education and development. So how's your understanding of scholarship changed as a result of that transition?
It's been, like you say, a massive transition. Biological sciences is of a certain kind of mindset of what counts as research, a very positive approach to research and very much focused on hypothesis testing and quantitative data collection. And when I moved into education, it made me have to realize that things that I didn't even think about or didn't even question, as in the kind of epistemology that I might have around how I would think about research, that there are other ways of doing it. And so it's made, I've had to think and become much more open-minded about what counts as quality research, and have to learn completely new methodologies. I have to get to grips with interviews and qualitative data and to be able to recognize quality from a very different perspective. And I think that's also why I became so interested in the idea of scholarship, because I was being constantly pushed. Well, in the last 3 years, I was kind of being prompted to think very differently. And it then made me think, well, what is this whole scholarship thing? And am I actually still doing research? I think I am, but yeah, learning from scratch, essentially.
Yeah, and I guess that's a challenge for lots of colleagues, whether they're colleagues who've been on teaching and research posts, and now they've moved over to teaching and scholarship, or colleagues who are researchers but are engaged in innovative learning and teaching practice and want to evidence that through scholarship. So what's the biggest challenge, do you think, in terms of kind of making that change?
Partly, at least for me personally, it was that I wasn't familiar with the methods that were available. So I'm very familiar with massive Excel spreadsheets with lots of numbers in them, and I can do statistics. But then that's not the data that you generate when you go and talk to students in a focus group. And so then having to become familiar with how to do things like focus groups, how to do things like interpreting interview transcripts and making sense of just large amounts of text, that it takes a lot of practice and kind of getting to grips with new ways of thinking, which we typically don't give ourselves time for. And I guess that's the challenge, is you kind of get thrown into this completely new field of research, and people think, well, you have a PhD, you know how to do research, just get on with it. And then you're kind of going, well, actually, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm having to learn from scratch as if I was now back to graduate school. And
so where do colleagues get support with that if they want to engage with this idea of academic scholarship, and they want to evidence some of their practice, whether that's through writing an academic paper or in some other way? Where would they go to if they wanted support with that?
come and talk to me, hopefully. So that's partly why we have that module built into the PG CAP, is to give people a chance to try out and kind of just dabble in this kind of research, but in a very supportive group where you get lots of feedback and lots of help along the way. So that would be a good starting point for those new members of staff. For anyone else, this is where I am keen to kind of hear what staff would like support with, and what kind of ways that I can be of assistance in facilitating those kind of things. That the ideas I have in mind, which obviously this is a new part of my role, so I haven't put this in practice yet, but the idea I have in mind is to facilitate the kind of action learning networks of people who are interested, who can support each other. Because when we do scholarship of learning and teaching type research, it doesn't mean you have to completely throw out your past research experience. You can still draw on the things you've gained from your research experience within your discipline, and you start by using those methods and then build on those. But if you have then opportunities to share that with colleagues, and colleagues kind of going, well, that's a great idea, but how about if you do this, and kind of ideas spark that way. One place that we already have those kind of exchanges happening is, of course, our pedagogic research conference that happens every year in January. And at that conference, people can present just an idea. It doesn't have to be presenting a completed piece of research. It can be a brief presentation of an idea, a question they're trying to answer, and then get the attendees in the audience to help come up with strategies for answering those questions.
It's great that so the staff have got you as a resource, but they've also got other areas they can tap into, such as the conference and so on. If a staff member were to ask you, why do you think that scholarship is important, what would you say to them?
I think scholarship is important because it helps us know that we're doing the best that we could possibly do. It helps us improve our own practice by actually using evidence to underpin that practice. That doesn't mean everyone has to actually conduct scholarship type research, but everyone should at least be interested in reading and engaging with that scholarship, and to continue to have those kind of dialogues about what works and what doesn't, and crucially, why it works or why it doesn't work. And so I think, to me, scholarship is kind of engaging in that reflection around practice, and to really help each other unpick assumptions that we're always making, to question current practice, to allow us to think in new ways and constantly strive to improve.
Yeah, so part of it's a mindset thing around continuous improvement as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a sort of, we're in a university, we should be interested in learning, and it shouldn't just be about our students learning, it should be about us learning constantly. And engaging in scholarship is a way of continuing that learning and kind of delving into a particular topic or question you might have and look for evidence and look for answers. And you're looking for answers in different ways.
So I guess then one of the barriers would be time, I guess, people's time to be able to do that. And obviously the one we spoke about before, which was, be brave enough to put your practice out there and for it to be critiqued. Are there any other challenges?
Yeah, I think time is a key one. And maybe it's not so much whether you have time, but what parts of your activities or what kind of activities that you feel are acknowledged as valuable from your community. And so if it's seen as a priority and it's seen as important from your peers or from your supervisors, then you will find the time to do more of it.
Yeah.
But it's a case of, everything we do is important, and it's kind of you can't do everything, so you have to prioritize. And if this is something that is just considered, yeah, it would be nice if, but actually doing the day-to-day teaching is more important, and we're not going to give you extra time, then this isn't going to be prioritized. So it's not just about individuals being encouraged or being interested. It's a kind of the whole community have to recognize that it's valuable for people to dedicate time to do it.
Yeah, it's a culture piece.
Yeah, it's definitely a culture. And I think that's partly why scholarship is kind of only just, it's not hasn't had as much positive attention as it maybe should have before, because the focus was very much on the big kind of research grants and the research that was ref submittable, because it has that big money price tag associated with it.
Yeah.
Which is one way in which we show what's valued. And so, it's about, well, if there is a way of recognizing and rewarding engaging in scholarship, then people will find the time to do that.
So Ellie, it must have been quite a big decision moving from researching in a specific discipline to becoming a senior academic developer and making scholarship your focus. So can you tell us a little bit about how you use scholarship in your own practice as a developer?
Yeah, so I think because I come at my role the same way I've kind of always come at it with, if I want to do something, I need to know, well, what's the right way or the best way to do it. So back when I was a scientist, a biologist, I might have gone, well, what's the best method to use to find this data? And I would have looked to the literature to find, a methodology paper that explains how to extract DNA the most efficient way. And I kind of approach teaching in a similar kind of way, that, if I'm going to design a workshop, I want to know, well, what's the best way to design this kind of workshop? And I go to the literature to kind of find that evidence. So I'm approaching my engagement with scholarship and my consumption of scholarship in the same kind of way. And then I kind of felt like if I'm going to be a senior academic developer and be teaching on the PG CAP and sort of teaching other academics how to teach, then I feel like I need a little bit more weight behind my. So I engaged in, I completed the MA in higher education, which was a really nice way for me to get to grips with doing qualitative research. It was a chance for me to essentially play around with scholarship and producing scholarship, not just consuming it, which then, you're always learning, and learning something new just means I'm even more excited to do more of it, because I think, oh, this is really cool. I want to do more of that.
Yeah.
So you kind of, that excitement feeds into doing more scholarship.
Brilliant. So you've recently completed your MA. What's the next project for you?
Probably going to continue along the same line. So for my MA, the kind of thesis project I was looking at one way of evaluating the impact that we're having as educational developers. And that kind of question is still going around in my head of, not so much what's the point of doing a PG CAP, but what do people get out of engaging with a program like the PG CAP or engaging with CPD sessions and so on, and not just kind of are people happy, but what kind of things do they take away from it? How does it change their practice, and what aspects of our program is actually kind of causing that change in their practice, if anything. So I'm still kind of grappling with those kind of questions of being able to evidence that the things I'm doing is actually working. Or if it's not working, well, what could I do differently or better? So I don't have an exact, well-defined project, but I still kind of playing with those ideas and thinking about how I can engage with our program, engage with other developers, to kind of think about those things.
Yeah, I mean, as a developer, I completely agree with that. I think that's one of the questions I'm constantly asking myself around what value am I bringing, and what can I evidence of something that I have helped somebody with. So how can I get that return on investment? And I don't mean investment in terms of monetary, but how can I get that return on investment in terms of somebody else's practice improving based on something that I've helped to develop. It's almost the holy grail of being a developer, to try and to sort that out, because it's the one thing that we always talk about, but we never get absolute concrete written down examples. Well, I don't anyway, not in my practice. I get anecdotal things and I get evaluations. I want to see more than that.
Yeah, and I think often those evaluations are just people saying, oh yeah, it was really good, I found it interesting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, but what are you doing with, what did you actually learn?
Yeah.
Has it changed you in any way? And part of, I suppose, I started thinking, well, what's my purpose? What's my role in the institution? And it's to support our colleagues around the institution to develop their practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And if a colleague says, oh yeah, it was really good, it was interesting, but their practice doesn't change, then I haven't kind of fulfilled my purpose.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago, when I was still quite fresh in this post, I might have, I would have struggled to think, well, how do I gather that evidence? How do I find out? Because I can't just go and measure, their blood pressure's changed by 3 points.
Yeah.
But now that I've gotten a bit more practice looking at kind of how to use interviews, and I'm starting to get to grips with sort of theories around kind of different methodological approaches to qualitative research, I'm starting to think of ways I might be able to answer that question. But just as we've said, for many of our colleagues who struggle to engage with scholarship, it requires time. And in these coronavirus times, time is not necessarily something we had lots of.
No, we get distracted, or we get, we go off in different avenues, don't we, just to sort out the immediate things.
Yeah, it's kind of always focused on what's the current crisis, or what's the current kind of, I need to get this module done, I need to get this resource finished.
Yeah.
And it's kind of taking the time to step back and think, well, what is this resource trying to achieve? And is this the best way to achieve it?
Yeah, exactly. Amen to that. That's great, Ellie. Thanks for that. We like to finish each podcast with 3 or 4 take-home tips for the listeners to reflect on in terms of their own personal practice. So if you could give us any thoughts, hints, or tips to reflect on, what would they be?
I think the first biggest tip in terms of engaging with scholarship is to stay curious. We're on a constant learning journey. And if you keep asking questions, then you're always going to be looking for answers. And one way to find those answers is scholarship. So rather than be scared of what scholarship might be. It's kind of just start asking questions and look for evidence. And by that very nature, you're doing scholarship in some form. In terms of finding time, that's a more tricky one. But it's finding the things that are valued and then spending the time on that. And if scholarship is something that is of value to you personally, then that is value in itself, and it's taking the time for your own development and for your own sake of enjoying your job. I think it's worth taking that time to engage with scholarship, at least to some extent.
Brill. Thank you, Ellie. It's been great to chat with you today.
Thanks, Ellie. That was a really interesting chat that we've just had with Ellie, and this is something that we're exploring as part of the Liverpool Fellows Network. The network is our institution-wide shared space for Principal Fellows, Senior Fellows, National Teaching Fellows and Kate Award winners. And one of the key values of that network is to disseminate practice to further promote and embed effective learning and teaching. So academic scholarship is something that we're debating and thinking about because it's a really important topic for many colleagues, and a topic that some of us are still getting to grips with in terms of what it involves and how we can engage with it. One of the key things that I think Ellie was talking about that is something that I really want to think about is this difference between engaging with scholarship and producing scholarship. I'm doing both of those in my practice. So in terms of my engagement with scholarship, I want to look for evidence of what works for my learning and teaching practice and how I'm going to apply that to my future practice. But also I want to take it one step further in terms of my engagement with academic scholarship. And I want to think about how I can produce scholarship. So how can I find ways to explore my practice with a view to creating evidence about what's working with my learning and teaching practice so that I can then use that to support the work of others.
I really liked what Ellie was saying about staying curious and being on that constant learning journey. I think we can all use this in our work in HE with a view to enhancing our future practice. It's very much something that underpins my work in organisational development, where we put in some sort of intervention into a team or into a person's practice, and then we'll look for that evidence to see how successful it's been over time. And then we'll go in and refine that through an iterative process. I also really liked what she was saying around the dissemination of scholarship and how it's not just around paper authorship, but it can also be things, I guess it can be things like this podcast as a way of disseminating good practice and scholarship. I personally like to create blog posts. I'm quite active on LinkedIn with whatever I'm thinking about at that moment, and that's a way that I disseminate the things that I've been learning about in terms of the good practice that I come across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think that's one of the big drivers for this podcast, isn't it? Is that we want to stay curious. We want to hear from others, hear about some of the excellent practice that's taking place across our institution. Do let us know what you think about that. We'd love to hear back from you. Feel free to tweet us about this episode at Live Uni Academy. You can also find Matt on Twitter at eLearnerMatt or myself at Alexandra_Owen. In addition to that, we've also added some further resources to the website, specifically thinking about academic scholarship. So if you'd like to look at these resources, you can find them at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy/podcast.
And we're really grateful for those who have taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. So if you've listened and enjoyed this episode, please do rate it, give us that 5 stars or the thumbs up, depending on what app you're in, as it really does help to get the show noticed, and therefore obviously more people will find us as a result. Bye for now.